Enoch Godongwana, head of the ANC's Economic Committee, said today that the ANC is in talks with its Labour allies to impose a minimum wage. That's to help redistribute wealth in the economy.
Also take a look at the issue. We're joined now by Dennis George, General Secretary of the Federation of Unions of South Africa, Loane Sharp. He's economist and Labour analyst at Adcorp. Gents, thanks very much for coming in. So, Loane, wealth redistribution in the economy, if we had a minimum wage, do you think we could see that?
Well, the ruling party is in a very difficult position. It knows full well what the effects of minimum wage are, particularly for the most vulnerable workers, but it has a constituency to support. So I think the way that that's been balanced in the election manifesto for 2014 is that the ANC has said it will investigate the possibility of a minimum wage. We know that when minimum wages were introduced in agriculture, employment fell from 2.1 million to 660,000, which is a cataclysmic decline. And for reasons that are related in mining, employment fell from 1.4 million to 550,000. So a minimum wage, and unrealistic wages, I should rather say, than a minimum wage, have detrimental effects on employment. And government will be very aware of that. There was a promise in 2009 to create 5 million jobs. There's a promise now in 2014 to create 6 million jobs. The promises get bolder, but the economic mechanisms become fewer.
Dennis, while there are the arguments that a minimum wage can be counterproductive to those it proposes to help, and we should let free market principles, be at play, in order to enhance competition, productivity as well. What's your argument that you're putting on the table?
Look, what we have experienced at our collective bargaining conference, was entirely the opposite. Where employers and companies in bargaining councils, where the minimum wages was already set, we found that a lot of our people are receiving less than the minimum wages. So from our side, we think that this is a process to first of all address inequality and to also deal with poverty. What is critical is that to recognize that we've got already sectorial determinations in for domestic workers, for farm workers, and bargaining council set wages, for the different sectors. And that is something that is very critical. But if you look internationally, while we were in Washington last week, the Obama administration, signed a federal directive to say they're going to increase minimum wages to $10 per hour, across the economy, and instructed the states to implement it. So clearly, since the 2008 crisis, what we have seen happening across the world was that working people are pulling on the short end. The wages of chief executive officers have accelerated, and bankers, and that is something that is a danger to prosperity, because if the wealth is continuously going to the top and nothing is distributed to the it's something that is sitting on a time bomb.
But do you agree with Loane's assessment that minimum wages can lead to job losses and make it unaffordable to hire people? So in the manufacturing sector, where we have seen factories closing down because factories simply can't afford to pay the minimum wages that are on the table.
Yes, look, our collective bargaining process has made provision for companies in a flexible way to say, look, if there's smaller companies that have challenges, then the process must be done independently, where they can demonstrate that they will be under stress. And then we've also put in other instruments to provide support, because a lot of our companies were operating in an isolated manner. And now that we're in a global economy, the pressures and the lack of innovation and productivity improvements are affecting us. But that is a long-term process. I think what is important is that we have to agree to a level that is not going to have a major impact on employment creation.
How do you agree on that level, though? Because a minimum wage neither sustains a minimum standard or living, or adjusts for the cost of living, nor the same everywhere, that cost of living. So how does a mechanism like
and we know that AMCA would like 12,500 rand a month for mine workers. I mean, is that a minimum wage that we can afford?
It's unrealistic, it's ridiculous in that particular case. Minimum wages are politically attractive because they make all the right noises to the electorate. But all I could illustrate as an economist is to say there are consequences of those decisions. If you raise the wages of people to a certain level, and force employers to pay those wages. Everyone whose productivity is below that wage will be retrenched. And it's interesting to see trade unions' view on this, which is generally favorable toward minimum wages, because minimum wages serve the interests of higher skilled, better paid, more experienced workers in general, and minimum wages keep young people out of the workforce, and in that way keep out competition for jobs from young people. So we have to look at the economic realities and ultimately hope that the political process is sensible. I don't see any commitment of the kind that Enoch Gondongwana has indicated in the election manifesto for this year. I think the ANC has left many loopholes to get out of this minimum wage dilemma.
I just need to correct one point that Loane Sharp was making. And he was saying that, the government doesn't do nothing when it comes to young people, But I think, the Minister of Finance have implemented, with the support of government, the employment tax incentive scheme.
I think that's something that you encourage, though, Loane, isn't it?
Yeah, for many reasons, Stephen. Firstly, it was introduced against union opposition, certainly from the ruling party's political alliance partner, COSATU. But at the same time, the youth wage subsidy, as it was called before COSATU's opposition, is, according to our calculations, going to create about 850,000 jobs over a 10-year period, which is really significant. We cannot underestimate the break with the past that this employment tax incentive or youth wage subsidy represents. It's the first mechanism under democratic government where the profit motive is being utilized to drive employment.
Do you agree, Dennis, with the youth wage subsidy effectively as a mechanism to address some of our unemployment problems in South Africa? Because there are arguments that it does not guarantee, for example, training and skills development beyond just that youth being employed.
We have raised our concerns with the government regarding the incentive, because we were very concerned, especially in your catering and in your commercial sectors in retail, where the wages is about 4,500 rand. That companies would simply replace older workers with workers that will be on a subsidy, and then therefore extracting the profit motive of that. And government then came back to us and intensified the penalties, for companies that would want to resort to something like that, because it's very difficult in economic policy instruments to regulate behavior, and to regulate the motive for doing things. But from our side, what we think is going to be quite critical, and this must probably start showing its head after the elections, and what the global economy is going to do, is going to clearly show, that there's going to be an uptake in employment. And just to give you another example, China, for instance, have decided that they are going to, for the next 5 years, per year, the minimum wages were 10% per year. And if you look at the cumulative, effect on that, because they clearly want to stimulate the domestic economy so that they depend less on exports, but to stimulate the domestic economy.
Productivity has to come hand in hand. How do you ensure that productivity climbs as aggressively as that wage growth?
The problem is this, and I've been saying this all the time to people, workers have very little control over how the productivity improves, because one important factor is investment. If your company is going to continuously want to use machines of 1950 and want to compete with companies that is using machines and infrastructure and training that is 2004, then your productivity is going to be less. So what we are saying is productivity improvement is something that management and the workers need to sit around the table and find innovative ways to improve.
But at the same time, you also don't want your workers to be replaced. And that's happened in some sectors, like the agricultural sector. Maybe a word on the February job number that you came out with today, Loane. 118,000 jobs lost. And that really stands at odds with the numbers that we've been seeing coming out of Stats SA, where, if they're to be believed, employment's been growing since the end of last year.
Yes, according to Stats SA, during 2013 as a whole, 653,000 jobs were created. Just to give you an indication, the formal sector of the economy employs less than 10 million people, so that's a huge number. That's about 8% of the total workforce employed in a 12-month period. I think more and more people are just regarding these figures from Stats SA on the employment front as contrived and difficult to substantiate. At Adcorp we deploy 200,000 people per annum. We recruit about 2 million people, come into contact with 2 million candidates per annum. We track their prospects, their placements, job inquiries. We track positions available, and we're not seeing anything like that in our recruitment databases.
Well, let's leave it there. Dennis, thanks so much for having joined us in studio today. Dennis George is General Secretary of the Federation of Unions of South Africa, and Loane Sharp, economist and labour analyst at Adcorp.